and welcome to Awkward's Anonymous, where we aim to navigate the awkward, uncomfortable discussions about pleasure and what is our right to getting, having, and experiencing pleasure.
I think the team is complete with Ina, Tas, and Iqbal. Ina?
Yes, my name is Sabrina Gacad, and I also go by Ina. My work has a lot to do with feminist research and gender and sexuality and power education. And I'm a stakeholder in this conversation because I have seen how difficult it is to communicate with people about the social aspect of sexual and reproductive health that is not about all the bad things that can happen to a person related to their sexuality or their health. And I feel that that gap in the conversation about the social aspects of experiencing joy or connection or even accepting that we are human beings and have a desire for something that is pleasurable is such a hard conversation to have. And that's why I'm here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bans from the Philippines with Ina. I am a feminist activist, advocate, and researcher focusing on SRA. And I am here as a stakeholder because I believe when we talk about SRHR, it should go beyond the technical health aspect, and we should talk about our rights beyond access to services and information and towards pleasure. Talking about pleasure, removing the shame and stigma on experiencing and enjoying things and that are pleasurable to us. And together with us are our friends from Bangladesh. Tas?
Hi, I'm Tasaffy Hossain from Bangladesh, and I'm a gender rights advocate. And we've been working around trying to break the silence around conversations, largely around experiences of women, of gender diverse population. And a big part of that is breaking like the taboo and the shame surrounding pleasure, consent, our desires, both in terms of when we talk about our sexual rights, or also even when we are talking about self care and how we want to see ourselves. Yeah.
And of course,
Yay!
you also have Val, our token male stakeholder. I'm just
Thank you, thank you. Yes, I'm Iqbal Hussain, working in FES Bangladesh office as program advisor and also working as a gender focal person in Bangladesh office. So, in compared to all of my guests or hosts, I'm very new in this field. So, pleasure for me, pleasure is whatever I feel to do, I want to do. So that's why I want to hear from you, hear from our guest, and definitely we'll try to accommodate as much as possible. Thank you.
Yay! Okay. Why are we here? What is our topic for the first episode of our Awkward's Anonymous podcast?
So for this episode, we're going a little bit deeper into our personal experiences. And this is our warm up because the we will have in the future will also have to go deeper into their experiences of these awkward conversations around sexuality and sexual and reproductive health and why this has motivated them to work in the advocacy spaces or the policy making spaces or the service delivery spaces. But for today, it's about us.
The conversation should start with us before we even ask people to remove the awkwardness and the anonymity in discussing pleasure. It should begin with us practicing what we preach. So, Ina?
Yes, let's recognize the experience of awkwardness in our body as we start the conversation. We'll be looking at experiences that we've had where we've felt ashamed of things that are related to our sexuality or our sexual and reproductive health. And we'll also check in with our sense of why our societies are the way they are with the shame and the stigma that they've put on sex and pleasure, or our cultures have put on sex and pleasure, and how this affects our agency or our ability to participate in these societies, in these communities, based on our sense of joy or our sense of safety. And then, of course, we want to talk about how we or why we should bring a pleasure lens into the SRHR spaces. So that's on the side of service delivery for health, and that's sexual and reproductive health and mental health, sexuality education. That's also in policy making. So, who wants to share?
It's so funny because it is an awkward conversation. It's so difficult to start, but I think we should again embrace it and just go with it. So okay, maybe I will begin. It's a bit difficult in my situation. Maybe Tas would have a bit similar experience growing up. I was born and raised in a Muslim household. So talking about sex is not just awkward, it's not just shameful. Maybe it could be sinful for in the context of how I was raised. So I remember when you were in high school or like late grade school, when you're starting to have these feelings of curiosity and like feelings of pleasure, you're curious about sex and I don't know, how do I say it? See, it's very awkward. I try to recall when I first started like having that kind of feeling or curiosity and things. And I was thinking it's so crazy because it was shameful even for myself, not even talking about it with anybody else. I don't think I ever spoke about it to someone else. But like I remember feeling shame and fear because I felt like what I am doing is sinful, morally incorrect, that I might go to hell. I mean, to that level, when I was young, like as an adolescent, oh my God, I don't think I will be forgiven because of these thoughts that I'm having. And it was only maybe later on in life that I realized that it is normal, it is okay to have these feelings of pleasure and exploring your own sexuality and what is pleasurable to you. What about you, Tas?
Yeah, Banks. I think it's kind of similar. I don't ever remember having a conversation about sex or body when I was growing up. I think there was some conversation, not necessarily conversations, but information being provided around puberty and menstruation. And even that is uncommon. Like when we had conversations about this among friends, some of them have never had that conversation in their home. So I think that was like something extra that I had where my mother did give me a little brief about what to expect when it came to menstruation. But anything beyond that was just not conceivable at all. So I think a lot around what pleasure might look like or what desire might look like came from actually looking at pop culture. And I think that was maybe also like odd, and I didn't really know what to think about it, what to feel about it, what attraction seemed like. And other than maybe with friends, we didn't really have conversations about it at all. And then there were, of course, like a lot more peer oriented pressure around what then attraction and desire should seem like. So instead of having a space to actually think about what desire might look like for me, it was a lot about, what it sounded like from others. I think, like looking back now, I think that's quite interesting because I don't think we had that space to actually think about what then pleasure might look like for me, myself. It was largely around what a whole group or a culture of people might think of as pleasure or attraction or desire. And then you sort of just take it for granted that that's the way to think about it. So it's always interesting to look back at it now and to think about then, okay, so how did I think of my own pleasure at that point? And a lot of times I think we didn't even think of it as pleasure. A lot of times, as soon as we felt anything close to desire or anything to do with masturbation growing up, and you instantly just felt shame around it, even though nobody specifically told you to feel shame about it. But I think the overall culture and concept around having interest in your body, having interest in things that kind of made you feel interesting and good, instantly made you feel shameful. So yeah, it's funny to think about it now and think about how then you kind of navigated it throughout your life to start feeling good about your body and things that give you pleasure.
I think that's so important to come to a point where you're thinking about your body and what feels good and not being awkward about it. And like my experiences growing up in this regard are related to how particularly cruel my mom was when things started to be about my sexuality in like even the most basic sense of it, the way I would dress up. At some point when I was a teenager, I remember I would dress up a particular way, or I don't even know it was a really particular way of dressing up or a particular way of speaking. And then I would get these comments about how what I was showing everyone else, the way I was dressed or the way I was speaking was inappropriate. Because it was like, in Filipino term is malande. And I'm like, I don't get it. What's wrong with the way I'm speaking? Or even as a child, the whole idea of having a crush was very for me. Because on the one hand, people would always be like, who's your crush? Who's your crush? And I noticed that a lot of people would ask kids about this. Who are you attracted to among your like preschool classmates? Like, really? Do people think about it like that? And then at some point, if I would respond to these things, my mother would just be like, you shouldn't be talking about this because that's inappropriate. And so I've always had this experience of sexuality being in my face. And whenever I tried to participate, I would always be drawn, or my attention would always be drawn to the fact that I was wrong to participate in these kinds of conversations and in these kinds of like just curiosities. And I think the weird part about it was not really knowing when I was right beyond that stage of being a teenager. What was I supposed to ask for in relationships? Was I even supposed to be in a relationship? Or what was I supposed to look for in finding my style? Or am I even supposed to be looking for these things? Like all of a sudden, all the little explorations I might have would have a wrong color to it. And so I was always just trying to figure out, well, this feels nice for me, but also already very prepared to hear negative comments about what I was doing. So I think that effect on me was like, I'll try and I'm ready to be shamed for the things I'm trying. And I think that's partly why I went into this whole field of study on gender and sexuality was because like, why? Why did I have to go through that growing up? Yeah. Maybe Iqbal has a perspective that might be unique to the male experience, or it might be similar.
For me, it's almost similar because I'm a shy person. So that will not reflect.
I'm trying to grasp myself with the idea that Iqbal is shy. Go ahead.
So for joining FES, I was not very much used to with this term. You were telling the masturbation, you were telling about your body part. So even though I am very much shy on eye to eye contact with a female or a girl, so in my this age, so the how I was in my childhood or my college life, so you can imagine that is my experience. So when I feel that I wanted to talk with someone who is opposite sex or opposite gender, my heartbeat was like more than 200. How she will react, I always think of others' mind or others' position, and that's why actually I stood always backbencher to sharing my experiences, my thoughts in anyone. So what I do usually, yeah, if I see something attractive in a girl, I just want to share with my best friend, not my colleague, not my peer, because I don't know how they will react. Yeah, for me, pleasure means whatever I want to see, whatever I want to tell, I can tell and I can see. So without any hesitation, I can express my things. Sexual pleasure and pleasure is totally different for me because sexual pleasure will give me the body satisfaction and pleasure will give me my mental satisfaction. For my dictionary, I difference in that way. There's a lot of shame expressing my, what should I say, expressing my feelings, and I don't share anyone. And that's why actually my colleagues helped me a lot to break my shyness. And they try to, I am not a huggy person, you remember? So they always try to hug me, ease me to talk with them, especially girl or female colleagues. So that gives me more pleasure. That means they are thinking of me. That is also pleasure for me. So I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable with them, with talking while we are in the group, taking pictures, doing fun. So that gives me also pleasure. And I came from a Muslim family. As a Muslim family, I used to teach that after a certain age, you shouldn't touch a female. But now this has changed, and I can see my younger sisters or brother, they are hugging each other, their cousins, they are mixing up. That is also okay. So in our generation, it was difficult because of the mindset of the parents. So they don't think about the pleasure. They always pressure with something. So that's shackle I wanted to break. That's why I joined with you. And definitely, this is my pleasure too, to having such a wonderful female speaker
Our.
who works with to have the pleasure.
Wait, Ins, I just want a moment to appreciate the realization that do men also experience all these feelings that women usually have? Even the idea of killing. Killing is like maybe a fleeting moment that you feel when you're like with a girl or trying to talk with, sorry, with a boy trying to talk to a boy or to someone you're attracted to. And this was asked in a platform that do men also have that feeling of shyness, hesitation, nervousness to be around someone you like? And it's so refreshing to hear from Iqbal that they also experience this, how times are changing. Maybe some things that we took upon us because our parents taught us this is the way we should be living life. How Ina's mother would police her sexuality, how we would be policed by our religion, but we are seeing hope. It's hope that our generation, millennials and Gen Z, are more open to accepting the changes that are happening in our society. Positive, I hope.
Yes, yes.
I think this conversation is going to lead all of us into therapy if you're not in therapy.
Oh no,
Like, I think the only reason why I
Yeah.
can see these things is because, like, oh yeah, I've talked about this with my therapist. The ideas are pretty firm in my mind now. And I can share. But like it's crazy. I don't think it's fair to grow up as a child. And I was into a lot of different sports. And then every now and then, no, not every now and then, on a regular basis. At some point, your parents are very involved when you're showering or taking a bath and getting dressed. And I would always get this comment about how my thighs are too big. And I'm like, now sitting here reflecting on that, I'm like, should I have ever been told that?
We've been policed by different people in our lives. All the inhibitions because we were told that this is shameful. You are not supposed to do this either because you are a girl or because follow this certain beliefs in our society. And I think that leads to our question, right? On why there's so much shame and stigma relating to all this talk about sex and pleasure. It's really difficult to navigate when we were younger, and all we can do now is look back and think, I wish someone was there to tell me it was okay. All of these feelings that I was having. Okay, we're
I think
being a bit emotional here.
Isn't it weird though that we grew up in different places, but there is a lot of similarity in our
Similarities. Yes.
experiences.
And regardless of male and female.
Yeah,
It's like there's
also.
a uniqueness to our experience of being shamed or feeling awkward,
True.
but there are similarities in the way that it has to do with your body or being attracted to someone. So why? Why is the world so cruel?
Cass, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm just getting my thoughts together. Yeah, I think like one of the things that do come up is the generation and how it's changed. Like, I think also thinking about what our parents grew up with and then what they tried to change while bringing us up, and then us in how we say things and try to shift things for whether it's our younger siblings or by now a lot of similar interactions I have with like nieces, nephews, or even my like friends' kid in talking about how we talk about bodies with them, in how we talk about even these conversations around, oh, do you like someone in your class? And then how that conversation is, as opposed to when we grew up and when someone asked us that question and then how that rest of that conversation went. I think it's interesting to see how with time, I think all of us try to kind of shift what shame felt like to us as we grew up, and then how we try to have that conversation or how we try to change the narrative of that for the next generation or next kin of people that we kind of get to support.
I would agree that maybe so much of who I am is really worrying about what other people would say, not just like my parents. And what I'm realizing now is we have been somehow suppressed of being free to be who we really are and being able to express our emotions and feelings and desires and pleasure growing up. And I think that would be my answer to how the shame and stigma on sex and pleasure affected my own agency and engagement with my own sexuality.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, especially more recently, we've been having this conversation with some of our friends growing up as eldest daughters. And a big part of our identity or what we felt was important in terms of our role was to actually ensure comfort for others and not so much about comfort of ourselves. And that was so conditioned from such a young age without specifically being necessarily told to do so, but it was so core to who we were. And it's only like I think in my 30s that I really started questioning that about myself. Right. So even now, looking at pleasure, not just in a sexual manner, but pleasure in terms, what is something that gives me pleasure for myself? I think it's difficult sometimes to just think about it for myself and only myself. So yeah, I think there's so much more to the concept of pleasure beyond our bodies and sexuality and how we get to define it or start thinking about it. And I feel like for women, especially, this is one thing that I feel like, especially, I see some of my aunts and my mother a lot of times. And I think if we actually ask them to express what would be pleasure for them, not for doing something for someone else, I feel like there wouldn't be a response we would get. And I feel like I struggle trying to think of it for myself. I have to really dig hard and keep on questioning myself if something is pleasurable just for me and not in terms of, oh, I like cooking something or like having people over. Is that because I like that for myself, or is that something I like doing because I like to see people around me feeling good and happy? That's just a question I've been trying to dig into for myself.
I want to jump in on that. I agree that we are wired to put premium on other people's feelings before ours. And that could be problematic later on in our lives because we are taught this way. We bring it to our relationships. And which is why so many women felt that they should not, or maybe they weren't even aware that they should prioritize their own pleasure, even sexual pleasure. What is unfortunate maybe is that when I was talking to some adolescents in the field, adolescents also have this feeling of not being withholding information, not being able to express what they because of their fear of disappointing their families. It's sad. But I also just want to raise before I give it back to you. I am also noting my privilege as a heterosexual woman. And if I am feeling this suppression, this policing, what more for gender diverse individuals? It's also a struggle, marginalization, and oppression that they could feel when we talk about sexuality and pleasure.
I was just thinking about how this is so textbook patriarchy. The way our bodies are seen as things that will signify reputation or like good social standing, and all our actions will either add to that reputation or diminish that reputation. And then it's not just you as an individual that's going to be affected, it's the rest of your family. It's your parents who are parenting you. It's the culture where you come from. And just like seeing bodies as things that should be like ordered, organized, as opposed to living, breathing things that are going to feel and connect and then want to find a deeper meaning to these connections or these experiences. Yeah.
So it's now that you brought up the problem of the root cause of all this is patriarchy, I think we should also discuss. So then, I should we be discussing pleasure? Why are we putting pleasure at the center?
I would, since this is a personal storytelling, I would say that we should put pleasure in the center of SRHR because if I did not have really good girlfriends, I would not have known how to use contraceptives. Or I would not have known how to express what I wanted in sexual relationships. Or I would not have known that heartbreaks were survivable and that there is life.
Not the end of the world.
Yeah. It's like I had to figure that out for myself. But if that were written in a textbook somewhere and I read it, I'd be like, okay, I'm good.
Yeah, that's true. For me, we talk about pleasure because textbook wise, when we talk about SRHR, it's not about just physical well being, it is our physical, mental, emotional well being. And it shouldn't just be well being. I should have the right to be happy, to feel happy. And it shouldn't be the baseline. It's not enough that our baseline is I am healthy, but what about exploring what I want to do in life? What makes me happy? What are my desires and all of that? And I believe that they are all interconnected when you talk about how it impacts our mental health, our right to life and all that. I think we should go beyond and also have the right to be happy essentially.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, for me, it's also similar. I think I'll start from also my personal space, why I think it's important, because life choices I've made for myself of being a single woman, not married, not with children. And there's this continuous pressure or question of why those are supposed to be viable choices. And somehow that all of these choices I have made at different points in time have to be in some way depriving myself of the capacity of a good life or a fulfilling life. So I think for that, pleasure is core to fulfillment, and the fact that we are not allowed to question what society dictates as what fulfillment or pleasure should look like. A lot of times I feel we just tend to go with the flow and just not challenge any of that. Whereas if we are questioning ourselves about what is something that is allowing me to make that choice, what is something that is making me feel good about making a certain choice, it is giving me the agency to then actually think about what I want and not what I am supposed to be doing. And I think that is relevant to when we think about consent when it comes to what kind of relationship you want, what kind of desires or what kind of marital status you have to have. Two simple things like what kind of occupation I want to be in, what sort of lifestyle I want to have, and being able to ask those questions and really be able to interrogate what is giving me pleasure, what is making me feel good about making that choice, I think really helps me at least to feel like I have the agency to decide then what is working for me. So it should be part of all of those conversations, whether it's as a child, you are in school and being asked, oh, what do you want to become when you grow up? Having being told that, oh, it doesn't have to be success as whatever someone else defines as success. Or it doesn't have to be that you have to draw the picture of the family that, like, you have to come from this specific kind of family. Your family might not look like what society dictates as family, and it can still be something that makes you feel good and provides you support. And, as Nina was mentioning, having the girlfriends and that community, all of that is also part of pleasure and what makes us feel fulfilled. So why doesn't all of those things count as my choices and my way of life and feeling fulfilled by it? So yeah, I think all of that becomes core to who then I decide to be as a person. And if I can't question what gives me pleasure for myself, then how can I decide then what makes me feel like a full person?
This is our me era.
Yeah.
Iqbal?
Yes, for me, actually, sometimes I think we are actor. We are acting to be happy, or being happy is not like whatever we are thinking. So, or sometimes social pressure, sometimes family pressure, sometimes our reputation also hamper us to not involve in that pleasure types activities. So that sometimes actually attract our mental health as well. For me, if I think that I'm happy with one person, I'm happy with that person, and I'm happy with conversation with that particular group, that is important. And also when it comes to is our HR thing, that okay, this is my reputation, this is my belongingness to the societies and responsibility to the society, so I can't do this. So that time actually give me more pressure, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling with others, or what I am supposed to do with the particular person or some particular group. So that gives me more discomfort, as we are not talking about only physical health, it's also attack our mental health. Education definitely is a barrier, or the orientation is a barrier, because the education system in here and the education system in Western country is totally different. So their upbringing and their sharing, caring is also different from us. So it varies, but we should not neglect our mental health as well, because if you are not mentally good, then it will attack your whole body. And yeah, the physical pleasure can give you pleasure for few days, but mental pleasure will give you long lasting feelings towards your belongings, towards your society and everything. So the bottom line for me is I prefer mental health rather physical health, because that actually will drive me to deep in whatever I want to do, whatever I think to do, whatever it gives pleasure to. So that is important, most important for me. But how many times we can express our this kind of approach to in front of the audience, or actually in front of my family as well? So that is the barrier, so we have to actually break the barriers, and this is why we're here, I think.
Yes. We are at color of pleasure, or one word that comes to mind when I think of pleasure.
For me, the color of the pleasure is red, because color of love is also red. So if I want to express my pleasure with love, then that reflect the color red. So that's why for me the color is red for pleasure.
I would maybe answer the question in terms of like what comes to mind when you think of pleasure. I maybe not what is the current status quo, but I would like my pleasure to be at my own term, me at the center of my own pleasure, and that I have the power to say or decide what is pleasure. What about you?
I'm thinking about the color of pleasure, and it's not exactly a color, but for me right now, I like, is sparkles a color thing, or is that a quality of when surfaces reflect light? I chose sparkles because like the feeling of pleasure would give me like a sense of I'm sparkling. Also, in my more recent explorations of what my own pleasure is, and in so many ways, I've noticed that like the sparkle or the way that the light kind of just spreads out or is reflected would depend on a lot of things. Like, am I comfortable? Am I enjoying a particular situation? Or not even just enjoying, but am I feeling like I'm well in my own body? And that can be a difficult situation, but knowing like I can hold myself is something that is, in a way, the flip side of pleasure for me. And then finally, also just all my explorations on just how I deal with the concept of attraction and how, since having done all the gender work and feeling like all the restrictions on what's attractive is changing for me, or what intimacy feels like for me is changing. I'm really noticing a change in the way I would approach like attraction and desire. And I want to try different things, but I'm also very scared because, like, do I do that? Am I too old for all these explorations? Am I supposed to be doing this? So, yeah, just like the whole reflective light, sparkly thing, it shifts. And I think right now that's what pleasure looks like to me, is like the shifting elements of it and like the shifting gradations of just how bright the light would be or how dim. Yeah, so that's my color of pleasure ish. That's what's yours.
Yeah, I thought this was like quite difficult, but I keep on going back to bright light colors. So things like yellow, similar to you, like I think every time I'm thinking about a color, I keep on going back to how it makes me feel. And I think pleasure makes me feel light and not weight. Light in the sense of like weightless things that make me feel almost like my mind is blank, and I somehow feel that feels like pleasure to me when I'm not necessarily consciously thinking about anything. I think that that's it. Like something which is light and bright and sort of all around me. Not necessarily just something I'm feeling, but something I feel embraced in a way. I don't know if that even makes sense.
Okay, so that was our first episode. And we are hoping that you will join us for more Awkward's Anonymous conversations on the right to pleasure.